And that's why I'm very happy to have a second panel with researchers who are coming from different Nile countries, but I think most important from also different disciplinary backgrounds, because as I think Terry has shown, we need to look at different scales, the global, the British Empire up to India, down to the local, and that's what geography teaches. We have to look at power relations, and that's what political science focuses on. We have to look at culture, and that's where humanities, anthropology focus on. Of course, we have to look, we also need to understand the role of technology and the role of infrastructure, and that's why we need what we, as social scientists, we call the art science. And of course, we need natural science. And I also really appreciate the comment by Zariun, and this is the role of the epistemic community. So, how do we frame, how do we think about the Nile? And the idea of this panel that we are going to have right now is exactly to try to put forward, to foreground alternative views about this river, because when we look at history and geography, of course, we always caught in what has been called the territorial trap. The main unit of analysis is the state. Of course, national government plays a key role, but what we are trying to do, what we will try to do in this second panel is to unpack this notion of national interest by looking at different scales and at different actors, and to see how they can help us in thinking in from different lateral ways, and hopefully advance also and contribute to negotiation and cooperation in the basin. So we will have a 4 presentation now, and I would invite the first presenter is Tamir Abdel Karim from the University of Khartoum. He's an anthropologist. He just published a book which is titled Power, Relation of Development. It's about dam construction in the Nubian homeland in North Sudan. So of course it's a way of also celebrating his book, which will be published by a German publisher, which I cannot. Thank you very much, Tamir. And his presentation will exactly focus on trying to unpack this notion, how dams, river, and the distribution of water is not simply a national interest, but within the same country, you may have different interests. And water distribution and infrastructure, of course, are national projects, but are also contested projects. And I don't think, if we think about infrastructure, big infrastructure, and how they are contested, being here in Turin with the high-speed train, the TAV, is not something we are very familiar with, but we tend to forget when we think about other countries, and we simply see Sudan, Ethiopia, and Egypt, Uganda as monolithic entities, while those issues are also contested and discussed within each and every country. So thank you very much, Tamir, for joining us here in Turin, and you have the floor.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for that generous introduction. And I will start with saying, please, I do not represent Sudan. This is my work, and I am a researcher. Yeah, Sudanese government would have said something else. Yeah, so because I see ambassadors here. So
yeah, of course, those are the formal representatives, and there will be the next session.
If you want to feed,
that is my own reading of Sudanese dams and controversies within Sudan, and trying to unpack this notion of national interest. Yeah. So, and I will show how what was viewed as national interest was very much contested with a lot of Sudanese, not only those who were affected by dams directly, but those who are living away from the Nile basin. And so that is what my main message is, like not to talk about homogeneous kind of unquestioned national interest.
Amir, can we say that you represent a way, an approach to look at Nile
exactly.
issues? The anthropological, the ethnographic.
I would prefer that, yes. Then I will start with nice images. This is Bashir, the president. What is said here is this is also dams boom in Sudan. After 2005, Sudan was about to build 5 dams. This is Dal Dam in the north, Kajbar Dam, and Marawi Dam is already constructed. There is all these yellow one are proposed dams, and then here in the eastern part of Sudan we have, it was proposed when this map was prepared, but now it is constructed, and then there is also an old dam which had been heightened. So all this, I call it dams boom in Sudan. All this was after 2005. And here we see, this is a journal issued by Dams Implementation Unit in Sudan. We see President Bashir thanking God for enabling him to do the renaissance in Sudan. So that kind of religious and developmentalist discourse that, yeah, we are taking the country. And all those images tells a lot about agricultural expansion and this very euphoria of development. Yeah? So that was a discourse which I call developmentalist discourse in Sudan. And let us see what happened to that. These are the dams, the costs. Of course, this is for Marawi Dam, this is the official cost, but many researchers say it went actually much more than 1.8. It went up to $5 billion. What was officially announced it is actually 1.8, and that is also one of the struggle, one of the controversy. Those who resist dams, they overestimate the cost and underestimate the benefits, and those who talk about the dams, they do the contrary, overestimate the benefit, and that is a very repeated story all over the world, and this we can see. And one of the things, for example, how that is done is governments, they never tell you about the exact production of the electric amount. What they say is that what they tell us is the installed capacity. For example, in your car, you have installed capacity of going 300 kilometers, but you never reach that. So this is what they tell us, yeah? This dam will, and that's a way of overestimating the production. So, and all these are all lists of dams, and here is also an interesting thing, is 2005 to 2016, our external debts peaked high. And also, this is ironically, this is the time also when oil was discovered in Sudan. So we had internal resource and external debts to meet this kind of huge demand for energy production. And so what happened? This is the Marawi Dam, and these are the people who were affected and submerged and resettled by Marawi Dam. They are about 100,000, 70,000 of them, called Manasir group. They refused to, 60% of this group refused to be resettled where the government built their houses. Their contestation with the dam builders, with the bureaucrats, that we will never leave the Nile basin, don't throw us in the desert. So at least if you have submerged our homeland, let us build our new homes around the lake. So we have access to fisheries, we have access to all these things. But the government insisted to build their resettlement there, and they insisted to stay. That is one story. The other story is about the one which was resisted from the very beginning, like Kajbar and Dal. So people refused to collaborate with the government totally. We will not, and we have seen, and the history is still, again, the history is very important, not only between countries, but also within the country. And what do I mean by history is, if we go, back to the, here, the history is here, when Aswan Dam was built, actually the reservoir came 120 kilometers inside the Sudan's border, and hundreds, thousands of Nubians from the Sudan's part were resettled in eastern part and in a very impoverishing condition, and you could read literature on that. And what that history did to this, because Nubians lives from here from inside Egypt till like all northern part of Sudan, and they speak the same language, and their culture is saturated with anti-dam sentiments because they have witnessed how dams can impoverish. So that kind of saturated culture, anti-dam sentiments, immediately worked as anti-dam provoker when these new dams were introduced to their land again. So, and to repeat the pro-dam arguments, it is the same everywhere. Gap of energy in Sudan, of course. More than half of Sudanese people, they don't have access to electricity. This is a fact. This is why Sudan need to build dams or look any other sources of energy. Okay, industrialization, agricultural expansion, Sudan like being Arab basket because we are not tapping into our potentiality. We have huge fertile lands and Nile and all those. And huge part of our Nile share goes to Egypt. We don't still use it. So all those discourse, yeah. And also eradicating poverty. This is how we will deal with poverty and unleashing the engines of modernity. So we have all those, what I call developmentalist discourse. On the other side, I also follow this power relation. How much, because one of the things we need to take care of is not only detecting the powerful discourse, the powerful actors' discourse, but also how hegemonic that discourse is cannot be measured unless we see how is it encountered from below. So unless we see the whole picture, we can't depend on like just the empires and like the state governments and all those like powerful actors of World Bank. Of course, it is very easy to detect those powerful discourse. But what about the local farmers, the villagers, peasants? What do they say? Do they internalize this discourse? Do they buy it? Do they really go with it? Or that kind of history is still hunting them? So the history is not hunting only in regional, but also within the national. Of course, if you have harmed me with one project and you are introducing another, you will find it difficult to convince me that I will benefit from this one. So that kind of. Then I was following. Like in this, I call it like continuum, this notion of developmentality. Here, developmentality is internalized. More we go, resistance is escalated and developmentality room is getting narrower, and then here we can have like, and that's exactly what happened in 2000, ironically, pre-1998, this like case of Kajbarda, it was local initiatives. They wanted to construct a small dam for themselves. Yeah? But when the government took the idea and made it a bigger project, which is engulfing, then they started to resist. Because as long as it is under their control, they could do something with it. Then this escalation continued till 2007. There was a confrontation between local communities and Sudanese government. People were killed, like 4 were killed and several were injured, and that was like a kind of bottleneck between the local communities and the. So I was following the power relations, the history of that kind of. But to understand also that not only the history, we also need to understand the ecology, the people's relation with. And what do we understand here? This is a settlement, typical settlement in all these areas. That narrow strips of land, houses, and Nile, and just 2 kilometers away, or less than 1 kilometer away from that, you find the most hostile desert in the world. And that's what we need to have in background. And people being lived for thousands of years in such kind of extremely dichotomized environment, they have also developed a nation of what does it mean to live beside the Nile and having our back to the most hostile desert in the world, and what I call it the eco-cosmology. What is that eco-cosmology? Is that Nile means everything here in this column, and desert is exactly its opposite. It is life versus death. It is domesticity, home versus wilderness. It is known, familiarity versus mysterious, something you fear. All those dichotomies. It is also us, we live here. Desert, no, those who live in desert, they are not us, of course. For example, they are nomads or something like that. It is also part of identity. Yeah? So when it comes to dams, what does it mean? It is their current situation versus potential area of resettlement. And when the resettlement contains all those elements, you can't call it resettlement. They call it unhoming. I ended up calling it unhoming, because you are being, what Nubian would tell you is, Uga fanachil fogil, we will be thrown into the desert. So that is a kind of state-society relation and environment-peasant relation coming together. So to provoke that kind of, to borrow from Anthony Giddens, ontological insecurity. Yeah, so this is an ontological base, like it has to do with existence. Yeah, so and that's what we call what I call politico-environmental nexus of politics of home versus displacement. This is what they say, thrown into the desert by a wild state. Of course, what will throw us into the desert, what is threatening our ontological security must be a wild. And that is how they like juxtapose the images of the wilderliness of the desert and wilderliness of the state, which doesn't consider them. And this like provokes the existential angst or like their worries. Yeah. And what added to that is the state's authoritarian intervention. So if you have that kind of history, if people feel towards their home like that way, then it needs a lot of negotiation to bring them on board. You don't take for granted that your nice, like flowery developmental discourse will convince people all of a sudden. Yeah. So, but that didn't happen. People found big machines around their village digging something. So, and what's happening, and they were also told that, yeah, we are excavating some archaeological thing, and they were lied to, and then again. So, one of the farmers reflecting on that told me, farmers conceptualize this as theft, the presence of the state to construct a dam at that area, they call it. He told me, what do you expect from a person who jumps into your house through the window? Why didn't they come in broad daylight? Meaning, why didn't they negotiate us, take us on board, all those things? It is only someone who wants to steal who sneaks up in the middle of the night. We are not so ignorant to believe and expect something good from such a people. So that kind of mistrust, the legitimacy, like delegitimization of each other's, that kind of antagonistic views then started to build up the resistance. And this, oh my God, okay, then I will have to a little bit fast. Yeah, so, and this is a very informative metaphor, yeah? Because when he say home and they should come, it tells us some kind of sovereignty within the state, and that is also what we witness in many African countries, like lack of legitimacy, and the state is not yet like rooted, like cultivated, like the legitimacy in the eyes of the people. Still, there is some distance need to be negotiated. Yeah. So all those kind of. This is why we need to do also political analysis of of his state. So when we see from the other side, planners, they don't see any point in discussing and taking on board ignorant farmers. Like, it will take time, you know. They will not understand this. They can't grasp how important these projects are, and why would we spend time negotiating with these ignorant peasants? And this is and actually sometimes they even argue that it is a Western kind of concept. When you ask them, why aren't you opening up participatory spaces, or so, they think this kind of concept is a Western concept to halt development in our nation, you know. Participation and these things, it's not suitable for us. Yeah, this is what he told me. You are asking about public consultation and such things, but these are European concepts. The public ground in a country like Sudan is unfair. In Europe, they consult the public because European farmers can go and buy seeds through the internet. But how can I consult our farmers who do not know anything about feasibility research? So that kind of distance between the state and that kind of lack of knowledge, because the issue we have is the issue of legitimacy, the issue of belonging, the issue of like taking each other's on board. But when you block that flow of information from below and from above, then you are contributing to the already historically rooted mistrust and distrust. Yeah. So, and that's why it is a serious mistake not to analyze all those mega projects, mega developmental projects within their political context. It is very important. So, and what we make from those is like recognizing that these communities as like post-colonial subjects, there is a particular notion of are they subjects or citizens, yeah? Because what we see in that bureaucrat's quotation, they are not citizens to be consulted, they are subject to be brought to modernity kicking and screaming. So, yeah, that kind of understanding of. So, but the contestation over the dam went well beyond contestation over feasibility, infeasibility, cost benefit, or how to compensate. No, it was not about these technical issues. The contestation was deeper than local people questioning the state's legitimacy to construct the dam and the state questioning the local people's legitimacy to resist the dam. So it is that deep. And let us also talk about not only the affected communities versus the state, but also what about the other communities in Sudan? For example, in urban areas, people of course appreciate, and they are, even if they are not pro-government, they are very much like in line with, yes, we need to produce electricity. Electricity cuts 3 times a day in the capital city. Of course, there is a clear need for energy gap here. Yeah? And there are also some areas, for example, and Darfur activists, what they say is actually all these dams, and in the story of dams in Sudan, what is more important is not actually dams, is what they call associated projects. Because if Marawi Dam costed 1.8 and officially and 5 billion, like documented by research, this gap actually is invested in what they call associated projects. They built military camps, they built airports, they built roads, bridges. It's not only dams, but these associated projects, it costs billions of dollars. And where was that constructed? According to, like, it is being constructed in areas which actually enjoyed development in history of Sudan. Like it did not bridge that disparity of development. All of it is constructed along the Nile River, but nothing was transferred to Darfur or Far East, or by then South was not separated or South. And what happened also, and I would love to have you comment later, is in my analysis, when the government of Sudan was signing peace agreement with SPLM, what they felt in Sudan, like, oh my God, South Sudaners are getting too much power. So then how can we like handle that? Because there was a Southern Rebel movement, SPLM, fighting against Sudan's government. And then 2005, they had to reach a peace agreement under international and internal pressure. So one of the things they did is to create this dams implementation unit. Billions of dollars from the external debts and the oil were pumped into that. And this unit was not under normal government structure. It was exclusively like directed by presidents and National Congress Party. And what happened is southern ministers were in seats which don't have real power, because the real power, much of the money, what we read in Harry Verhofen's book is between 2006 to 2008, 40% of national budget was directed only to this Marawi dam, and we saw like how many dams were planned. So that tells you is you bring your previous enemy to seats of power which doesn't have resources, and you reserve the real power in an administration which you only run. Yeah? So, and that created or maintained the distrust between the coalition of government between, it was called national, national union, transitional government. That created a distrust between SPLM and NCP. And that had its impact on separation of the South, because when they signed peace agreements, they were saying we will make unity attractive option. That was at discursive level. But what they practically did is just concentrating investment within the North, and even within the North, within those areas which historically enjoyed more development. And that created, of course, contributed to the separation of the South and within the Darfur movement. So in that sense, how can, if all these have been created by dams regime in Sudan, how can I call this like Sudan's interest? I am almost done. Yeah, I'm done. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think I made the point. Yeah.
Yes. I think you made the point very well and very clear, Tane. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm also interested to listen to the thought about the ambassador of South Sudan on this, but I would like to leave this for the panel with the
discussion.
And the diplomats, because unless otherwise there's not sufficient time for that. If we keep so, are there any requests for very sharp and punctual clarification? Otherwise, we move to the next presenter. Not comments, please.
I know you're feeling against diplomats, but I have. But I just have one question to Professor Tam or Dr. Tam. You have kindly examined all the Sudanese dams, and you mentioned about the principle of sovereignty, the country, the government against its own people. In your point of view, what is missing? Is it an internal planning of what we need and how we achieve our needs, or it has its transboundary vision? How we can mix between both of them, because the dams is on a river that is shared by several countries. So with building so much dams, it's because of lack of vision, or there is something missing only in the internal plans. And I must say, I'm not defending any. I'm only allowed to defend my own government, not other governments. So, and this is what actually the best part about being a diplomat. You do not have to defend only your country. You only have to defend your own country. So this is my question. Thank you very much.
Is it lack of vision, or do we need more taking the all actors? That was your question.
Yeah.
Why is this boom? Is it a lack of vision? I wouldn't say it is a lack of vision. There is a vision. The vision was to reach 30,000 megawatts by 20,000 megawatts, which is enough for Sudan or something like that by 2030. That was a vision, okay? But the thing is, like that vision doesn't take into account our context, the context of state-society relation in Sudan. Like people, when they sit down in Khartoum and plan in neat papers, they think this will be just immediately applied. They don't know how troubled the ground is. That needs a long negotiation, taking on board, because, like as I said, people who have been affected by High Aswan Dam, they are still like the injustice, feeling of being betrayed by both states, actually, not only Egypt but also Sudan. So they feel they were sold out, like that. If you have that kind of history, it needs a particular approach to take them on board. So you don't come up just with another dam and thinking that they will accept. So it needs political commitment to negotiate, to discuss with people, to take them on board. Not that you are a doctor and they are the patient and you are treating them with that kind of subjecthood mentality of I am the, So that kind of changing the political mindset, reversing the antagonism between state-society relations are needed. That's, I think, my main point. But when it comes to regional versus within national, of course, national is one block in the building. If that first block is not well built, I wouldn't see any sustainable regional. For example, if Sisi is collaborating with Bashir now and Bashir is overthrown tomorrow, then I can imagine, because if we have not built a state over a long period with like a kind of unified vision, which like all political actors across agree, they don't fundamentally disagree, then that is like sustainability of regional collaboration. But if we are antagonizing within the nation and you are collaborating with my antagonizer, then the moment I take power, I will have an issue with you. So that is why if we don't build this first block, I can't see how sustainable the regional integration can be.
This is this is very. I'm sorry, I'm taking the floor too much, but it's very. I mean, this discussion is very rich. But the government are dealing with each other. I cannot say, well, I will not deal with this government because it might be thrown away. I cannot put this in my perspective, but I can see this government is in power, and we are countries, and I have to deal with it. And there is a process of international law related to this. Needless to say. What I meant by the lack of vision is that if there is let's say the countries of the Nile Basin agreed on a vision on how to best utilize the available potentials. Do you think that we will be in need of this dams, this number of dams, or we will have to think how to do, for instance, power connections, how I'm going to benefit from power and others will benefit from water, this kind of benefit sharing that we are talking about. That's what I meant by lack of vision, not lack of vision internally, but on a regional perspective.
Actually, that is one of the points people are discussing. Actually, if Marawi dam alone costed us 5 billion, actually, with half of that cost, we could share with Ethiopia, and that was a possibility when they started, that they could collaborate, and get more than what we get from, and the evaporation from Marawi dam is much higher because it is in the middle of the desert, and the reservoir is very wide, so we could save a lot of water, we could have more energy, we could have more collaboration with Ethiopia. So, and that could also be extended to collaboration in terms of agriculture, because we have wider lands, agricultural land. So that kind of, yes, vision would be, yes, of course.
I'll keep silent for
thank you.
We learn that vision, yes.
Thank you very much. Indeed, I think your remark about the governments that, of course, have to talk to the other governments, because that's the main counterpart, I think paved the way in a very good way to next presentation, which is about Abir Abazid from University of Leiden. So thank you very much, Tamir. Abir is a political scientist doing a PhD at the African Studies Center of Leiden in the Netherlands. Why I say it's an interesting remark comparison, because in international relations, of course, the state and the government are the main unit of analysis, but we are not the first one discovering that there are also other actors, and so unpacking this idea of national interest. And there's a big stream of international relations studies looking at the role of non-state actors, of civil society in international politics, and that's exactly what Abir is searching for. The role of civil society, transboundary civil society in international, transnational civil society, we can call it in many different ways, in Nile hydropolitics. So again, thank you very much, Abir, for being with us, and you have the floor.
Thank you, and thanks for discussion, for Tamer, because it's literally paved the way for Zarul, who are the other actors in the Nile. And if we are starting to looking for, is there civil society in the Nile? And the first question come in mind, who is the civil society? What do we mean if we consider other actors in the Nile besides governments? So we can consider, as usually when we are saying civil society, it is NGO, non-governmental organization. So every country on national level and transnational level, we have different NGOs working, for example, on SDGs or working for water facilities and so on. Sometimes it might be international NGO like Water-Aid. I'm just giving examples of organization working in water sector. Or it might be, like Zerman mentioning about epistemic community and research centers and universities. One of example is the hydraulic research centers, and all Nile countries have water research centers in different names. But on the other side, it might be international one, like IMI, and it's a very active research center in the Nile basin. Or if we are moving from structured one to less structured one, if we are talking about this Google saying it is water harvesting people in Ethiopia, this is according to Google. So people also as a community come together to collecting water. Or like in Egypt, we have this water user association. It is a big, not a project, it's a policy now to manage irrigation canals. Or like Tamer mentioning about anti-dams movement crossing, not only in Sudan, but in other countries in the basin. Or if we are talking about who plays the role of middle, the parliamentarian, so they are like the channel between the grassroots, the farmers on the ground, and the policy and the decision maker. So it might play the role. Also the media, and this is one of journal specialized to cover the Nile issue. So all of these examples we can consider as a civil society as long as they are not part of the state. But on the other side, how can I put them in the same basket? Is it applicable or not? But back to some theoretical issue, why we need all of them? Because we're starting the paradigm shift happening in early 1992 with Dublin Conference. This is integrated water resources management. This is paradigm principles that now dominating in all policy making in around the world and also in the Nile countries. This integrated water resources management saying that because we have the scarcity of water and there is our economic use or utilities of water, we have land, we have forest, we have drinking water, so all of these sectors need to manage holistic. So if I would like to holistic management of water, I need the participation of different actors and stakeholders from all of these sectors. So this is the vision of integrated. Later on, we have the term of water governance. Governance coming in everywhere. But water governance here, it is more likely about uncertainty of environmental issue. So because we don't know what is going on in climate change as Lama going on, is we need to collaborate and we need to have a decision collectively. These two paradigms happening as on policy level or policy-oriented one. But on the other side, and it's for a long, long time from colonial settlers, we have a community-based natural resources management that focusing, the departure point is people or the community on the ground. It's talking about how the indigenous knowledge, how the traditional people can manage in sustainable way their natural resources like forests, pastoral. From this paradigm, it comes on the rule of people, not as a policy oriented. Later on, we have different concepts coming in. We have participatory development, especially for aid organization. We have hydro-solidarity, focusing on the value of justice and equity. We have environmental entitlement. Yes, this is my land, but I don't have the access because of might be infrastructure or project, or water rights and the water pricing. So all of these paradigms and concepts, managing the policymakers, managing the fund or donors, give a space to have the voice of non-state actor or civil society. But on the other side, what I keep thinking in our cases, in African countries, as Peter Eka mentioned, we don't have civil society as a one civil society like it is developed in Western country. So we don't have this political space and private sector, and then we have the third sector, which is NGO. No. In our cases, we have primordial public, where it's primitive public, where it is genuinely emergent because it's based on belonging, it's based on like water harvesting or land issue. These farmers, because they are live or villages, settlement, they are Nubian, so they are belonging to the same ethnicity, they are belonging the same culture, so they are sharing their interest and history due to the geographical approachment, we can say that. So due to that, they starting to organize themselves as a self-help organization or association, any frame it can be. So this primitive public, it is active in our countries as African countries. On the other side, we have the state. And this is the state structure. Then we imported, we have, after the independence, we have the private sector, we have the state, and then we have like syndicates, we have other association, even the farmers association, and when it's becoming have a legal structure. So these two publics, it's working in our Nile. So these two public, it is literally needed and interconnected in the Nile. And I'm going. Between these two public, I back to again to, do we have a transnational, the collective vision in the Nile or not? Some examples in the Nile. The main one, it's Nile Basin Discourse. It is a platform or a network of civil society organization in different Nile countries. It is located in TB, and I think it's established 2003 or 2004, if I'm not wrong. And the main aim is to foster dialogue. So we collecting all or representative of civil society organization from the Nile countries to sit together, to share together their knowledge, to share their activities on the ground, also to have like a pressure, or sometimes they use the word of watchdog for Nile Basin Initiative and watchdog for their countries. So this is one of example as a transnational, as a collection of civil society organizations, structured NGOs, legal structured NGOs in, I think, in all Nile Basin countries. Another example, and it is very active and literally in Lake Victoria, because of, again, it is economic purposes. Lake Victoria, it is the source of economy, all of these 5 countries, if I'm not wrong. And the East African Communities Organization, it includes, they saying it's 153 member organization. Also, it is again it is a platform of different small organizations in Lake Victoria countries, and also caring about to affecting the decision makers based on advocacy and based on knowledge sharing. Other sides, we have nice civil society emerging. The Nile Project. Nile Project, it's like my colleagues, you are going to hear and listen and enjoying, because it is about a musician. So how the music, or non-tangible or non-hard dialogue, and listen to be having sharing our identity, or co-creating, as they mentioned in their website, our identity through music. And now they have a project with university students. So they are working on different targeting group. It is not farmers, it is not fisheries, like in other different. And one related to epistemic community, because researchers are the backbone of decision makers. So we have a Nile Basin capacity building network, and it used to be in a good, or still, it is supported by IHE, and it is based in Cairo, and it's trying to have dialogue between researchers and to creating research objectives and models, or all of this hydraulic and scientific models they developing together. And if you knock on the door for NBI, you can see all engineers there. They passed by the Nile Basin Capacity Network. So there are a few examples of transboundary. On the other side, we have a national one, but still the debate we have raised with Tamer, it is still going on, because we have the issue of, if I would like to engage civil society, most of organizations engage them on principle level. They have, yeah, this is in our value, and we are pleased that civil society and multilateralism, blah, blah, blah. But when we are talking about governance cycle or process, it is difficult to find that permanent attendance of civil society representative in a Nile Basin Initiative or in other policy-making organization. Some argue, like Tamer mentioned, is about capacity of organization. How come I can bring some farmers to see the modeling of dam or irrigation scheme or something? So I will targeting highly educated, the elite, the intelligentsia, so this, or epistemic community, because they can understanding me. So this type of civil society, I will engage them. Again, it's lack of regional coordination, because if you are talking about Lake Victoria and the NBI or Nile Basin discourse, to what extent do you have a coordination together? Yes, we have a memo of understanding. But what is after memo? Yeah, we are waiting. We are waiting because of the funding issue. Funding issue, it is a big problem. And when Nile Nile Basin discourse have booming and have had active sessions and workshops because there was a big fund from DFID, British aid. So when the British aid disappeared, so the collective original coordination also disappearing, because also on the other side, our governments don't give more resources for this sector of civil society. And on the other side, there are a debate, we don't need money from government. Again and again, power asymmetry, if who I'm engaged in, which voice I'm looking for, which farmers, even if on community level, it is because of the elite in the community, or because it's like we are in Italy, it's representing all people, has a city-state. Is it in such manner, or who has a power, even religious power or social power? So I'm still searching. I'm looking for civil society. I don't know it can cooperate or coordinate or emerging. We have the political system to emerging. I don't know. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Abir. Again, question for clarification.
Don't leave. We still have questions.
Because there is a music.
Yes.
The music is coming.
Yeah. Zareen.
Thank you, Abir. It was good, really. Yes, we are still searching for the suicides in the Nile. Yes. Their presence is obvious. We have different suicides here and there, and the role played by the Nile Basin discourse. When it was started, it was huge, and it was believed to have some impact even at the grassroots level. So, what is your general assessment of even the existing civil societies, no matter what? Are they impacting at the grassroots level? Are they changing something? Are we moving forward? You know, after all, it must serve something. That service, that purpose, I believe should be to serve the people. It's not about the state, or earlier was said, yes, of course, we are territorial and the state is the center of discussion. Are they really changing that from focusing on the state and what's believed to be national interest to the local people at the grassroots level? Are they working that? You know, when the civil society organizations are strong, they will have impact even at the state level. Are they doing that? Do you see any signal of that in the Nile?
Yes, there is a case, Rusumo Dam, and in this case, I don't remember now the details, but it's helping the role of women at the time, because women have some complaint about the location and how they can commune for their market. So with this hearing session happening at that time, they have an impact. So again, the power that affecting the decision making is the local NGOs. It is not Nile Basin discourse. But on the other side, if I am a member in Nile Basin discourse from other countries, and I'm hearing this story, so it is like affecting. So I believe that yes, NGO may have an effect or knocking the door for decision making. And also on the other side, it might be debatable theoretically, parliamentarians, because parliamentarians are more active. These members are active in our countries because they are connected to the community. Like you have also in Kabyle level. In Egypt, Kabyle level is perfect. We had the discussion yesterday. Kabyle level is perfect in terms of participation of farmers. But if you are coming for other issues, it might be not effective. Water User Association in Egypt, because it is pieces, but on the holistic, to be a transnational, as Nile Basin discourse move a case for Nile Basin initiative, let's to stop this or let's to modify. I haven't yet. I hope.
Lama.
Yeah, no,
You can go first.
ladies first,
Ladies
always.
Avi, thank you for that excellent presentation. I wanted to ask you about your thoughts around NGOs and civil society movements within Nile Basin countries that have emerged within specific national contexts to do exactly as you mentioned, Zerman, to feed or service a specific objective in a country that maybe the government or other has not been able to service. But because of the limitations of NGOs and civil society movements within our countries have been, well, this is a safe space, shut down. Let's be very honest about it, for whatever reason. The one that comes to my mind very prominently, and I think of this as a very successful case model that I would have hoped is, for instance, Nafiyev in Sudan, is this beautiful movement that emerged to service the floods that continuously happen from climate change and otherwise in Sudan as a movement to help these people and to help those that were underrepresented and the vulnerable people in Khartoum that homes were completely demolished. And as this initiative, this civil society movement that comes and progresses in this, and again, servicing a need or a desire that cannot be serviced, where then do you feel, because of the limitations and the specific liberties and freedoms that are not necessarily given in many of our countries, how do you feel that they can then emerge and truly fill that void and service the community in that way without stepping on any toes, if you will?
Sometimes I'm thinking I'm thinking, like you raised, it is about civil society. It is not only for service.
Yeah.
So if you are creating a mentality like Nafir, and like water rights, about pricing water, so if you're creating this mentality, I think you can have a permanent or sustainable voice about water. Any water, it is not only the Nile. National issues of water or transboundary water. Unfortunately, we don't have, but it might be, I don't know. In terms of social movement, it is accumulation happening, so it might be something come on the way. Mr. Ambassador.
I will build on the question that both my brother from Ethiopia and Dr. Lama has said about the role of the civil society. In your point of view, we have listened to your presentation, and you clearly clarified what are the civil society that actually exists in the Nile Basin. In your point of view, what is, I know it's a big question, maybe I cannot ask you for a complete answer, but in your point of view, what is the role of the civil society in the Nile Basin countries in order, let's say, or if a civil society has a role, in order to make the officials, or to help or to assist the officials in getting out of the impasse that we are facing? Do you see that we should intensify the parliamentarian connections among the Nile Basin parliaments? In your point of view, what should be done from the civil society? What the ideal role that the civil society could do? Thank you very much.
If my starting point, as mentioning about Nile Basin and Dr. Terry talking about the Nile as one entity, but I think we need to foster as governments to put more facilities to make civil society organization to meet each other. Because the knowledge sharing happening at the time, experiences, tools of pressure governments, they are sharing. There are different cases. For example, in vision discourse, they made an visit tour, and they visiting Egyptian parliamentarian at the time from Egypt with Sudanese and Ethiopia. They going and visit the Nile Falls, I think in 2012 or 2013, Mustafa Gindi and so on. So some of them saying, it is my first time to see saying it is plenty of water, but there is no electricity. So when they become on the field and feeling what's happening, it creating, like we are just saying in our research, trust building and sharing and so on. On the other side, when they coming to Aswan and I think they stopped also in Qina or Minya, and also see for the first time the Egyptian farmers. So Egypt, it is not like the Nile and this Nile towers in Cairo. They are the same farmers we have in our villages. So exchanging this vision and the images, helping them to have a dialogue and not have to stay, this is our national interest. We have to collaborate, we have to share, because we have the same people. This is what I got from my research until now.
But I have just one comment on using the word to pressure. If you want to, let's make it as one team, two parties, two stakeholders. They need to work together in order to achieve something good for their people. If you are starting with we have to pressure, I can assure you you will not achieve what you want. But it's a kind of several stakeholders that they should work together, including the government, in order to achieve something good for their people. This is my advice if you wanna move forward.
But in Uganda there isn't a case on safety.
Okay.
And on the other side, I think from a hydraulic perspective, to distribute water, you need also pressure.
Yeah, that's for water.
It's water distribution.
Just a minute. We had a very good experience in the Nile with an ambassador. As you remember, when there was during the bad days in Egypt in 2011, later on, within 3 or 4 months, the Egyptian there was an Egyptian delegation,
public diplomacy
delegation in Ethiopia, and it was welcomed by all the authorities in Ethiopia, including the head of the church, the prime minister, the president, the education sectors, and later Ethiopians proclaimed that in Egypt we have met with His Excellency the President, the parliamentarians, and with the writers, the epistemic community. The same happened in Sudan, from Sudan to Ethiopia, from Ethiopia to Sudan.
And same to Egypt. Ethiopian delegation when they came to Cairo.
This experience was really good. It paved the way for the people to interact, to know more each other. And when the Egyptian delegation, for instance, came and asked Ethiopia to postpone, for example, the ratification of the CAP, to sort out our differences, Ethiopia said, okay, let Egypt establish a stable government, then we will start discussion on the matter. And on, like for instance, the international panel of experts, it was established after the request from the the Prime Minister. Ethiopia initiated that because the Egyptian public diplomatic delegation also just asked if there is a way to work together on the dam issue. And it was really good, and I think we need to find a way to nurture such engagements so that it can have also impact on the people and enhance also our cooperation in the basin. That would be really useful. It was really a good experience.
Thank you very much. Abir mentioned also about the need to go beyond utilitarianism, and to create a different mentality. And I'm very happy then to introduce next presentation, which is exactly about this, about the role, how music can help us in constructing the Nile, the river, as a common entity, as a common resource. Yesterday at the Egyptian Museum, we had, I think, a very visible, tangible manifestation of the power of culture and of music. And today we will hear from Megdelawi Mesai Deribe and Metli Berioun Melese. Also some reflection, more theoretical, and also some background about this power of the music in helping us to construct the river as a shared resources. And I'm very happy that they are here with us, because they are, I was mentioning before, I was talking before about interdisciplinarity, so they have a background as an engineer, Then they did their MA at Wageningen University in the Netherlands on environmental science, and now they are engaging with the cultural dimension of what they've been studying as a resource. So I think we need more of these trajectories, patterns, and scholars and researchers, particularly from the engineer side. Thank you very much, and you have the floor.
Thank you guys for staying. So our approach towards the Nile is more mellow, more soft. So we're trying to look at what the role of music, what music can play in hydrodiplomacy in the Nile, because music is what we have in common. All the countries in the Nile share the Nile as a very important theme in their music. So we're just thinking if music can have a role in what was being mentioned by Avir and also the embassy representative from Ethiopia on shaping the social discourse. So we're trying to bring music as a soft skill, if you will, to sort of influence and shape social discourse. I don't want to say a lot about the video. We'll just play the video and then have a bit more comments later on.
Yeah, okay, just one last thing, just to build up on what His Excellency Mr. Ambassador said a bit before. Sometimes academicians can come off as looking at the politicians as some kind of culprit per se. We understand your position as well, I just want to say that. And this project is also one way of looking at that. We understand that politicians are also challenged to actually perhaps do things that might actually not be acceptable by the public, basically. So if actually the public can connect, if we can know each other, perhaps it will also be easy for politicians to basically do their jobs. So this is kind of that kind of approach, basically.
Music?
And one last thing, we apologize for the picture quality. It's not exactly like the movies. It's just a slide that it's a very simple video.
You can enlarge it if you put on full screen. Yeah. On the left. Sorry, no.
Okay.
Music is an expression of ideas, opinions, and emotions of a society. Communities often portray their history, ideas, and values in their music. A good example of this expression can be seen around music on the Nile and the Nile riparian countries. The Nile has been a great part of the musical narrative of the riparian countries for centuries, if not millennia. The people have portrayed their love, appreciation, and values for the river. They have also documented how changes on the river affected their lives throughout history. It is obvious that music is dictated by the emotions, values, and history of a society. The question is, can music in turn dictate or influence the emotions, opinions, or mindset of society? In this presentation, we explore how musical representation of the Nile can be a worthy avenue to pursue in advancing hydrodiplomacy in the region. We took some sample music about the Nile from 3 riparian countries, namely Sudan, Egypt, and Ethiopia. We then show the general narrative of music on the Nile in these countries and explore if and how the musical narrative changed with respect to significant infrastructure development in the countries. Music about the Nile in the Sudan usually has a romantic and grateful narrative. Numerous songs praise and thank the river for its blessings and paint romantic scenarios happening around the river. Here are some sample musics. An interesting shift in narrative was observed in Sudanese and Nubian songs during the time the Aswan High and Merowe dams were built. The songs back then had a melancholic tone, narrating how the sound of the river was no longer for the Nubian people and how they were forced to relocate from their ancestral homes because of these dams. This is an interesting shift in narrative from the usual grateful and romantic tone observed in Sudanese songs. Music about the Nile in Egypt displays the strong attachment of Egyptians to the Nile. It portrays the Nile as a source of life to Egypt, as a companion to its people, and as an integral part of their everyday life. During the construction of the Aswan High Dam, contrary to the Nubian sentiments, songs in Egypt portrayed a sense of national pride on being able to build the dam. Music about the Nile in Ethiopia has two aspects to it. While songs generally acknowledge that the Nile, or Affari as it is called in Ethiopia, is the beauty of the country and a source of pride, these songs also invariably display a sentiment of sadness and regret about not being able to use the water. Many songs criticize the Nile as being a traitor to its country while serving others. However, this narrative radically changed after the announcement of the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or GERD. The songs that came after GERD display a sense of hope, determination, and pride on finally being able to use the country's greatest resource. have been in a state of constant tension because of the Nile waters for millennia. But, having seen how the Nile is deeply entrenched in the musical culture of all these nations, we must ask if music can bring these countries together. Can music be used to support hydrodiplomacy in the Nile basin? The answer is yes. The Nile Project is one such initiative which is trying to bridge the gap between these countries through music. The Nile Project is a band of musicians from 7 countries in the Nile basin. They aim to create curiosity and conversation between people by mixing and sharing music from different Nile basin countries. They preach unity, collaboration, and common use of the Nile water through their music. Music is a powerful and universal tool which can deeply touch and influence people. By using music as a tool, musicians can help shape the social discourse and narrative to create a favorable ground for collaboration. This creates a great opportunity to push hydrodiplomacy in the region further, as it makes it easier for policymakers to negotiate on the public's behalf. Harnessing music as a universal and powerful tool can therefore pave the way for better and smoother diplomacy in the region.
Okay. Thank you very much for collecting such a comprehensive sample of different music. So maybe you want to comment on that?
Okay, maybe just a little bit of explanation to our Egyptian friends. One of the songs by Shirin, we actually didn't know the situation about the artist, even if we actually contacted Egyptian acquaintances and Sudanese acquaintances for collecting this music. So we just want to say that. Yeah.
If I may, just one aspect was missing is when it comes to the Egyptians, everyone who's engaged or married should take his wife as an Egyptian to walk beside the Nile. It's a symbol of love. I've done it. I mean, and I'm sure every Egyptian have done that. We have to take our fiancé or wife and walk beside the Nile bank and just eat a grilled corn or drink a cup of coffee or tea. For us, I don't know why it's necessary, but maybe it's because the Nile gives us a symbol of love. My advice, if you, I'm not talking about Shireen or Rabbi, it's your right to take whoever artist you want. I cannot deny your right to do so. But when it comes to the role of music and culture, you have to be very careful about the message you are sending. And because if you are selecting, there's a variety of songs, a variety of poems. If you have to be careful when selecting these songs or these poems, because sometimes it gives you a signal that might lead you to another direction. I have seen some, I will not mention anything about what you have chosen, but there are some negative signals that I got from the poem or the music that you have chosen. Give me, some of it was a news for me to hear about the Nile, but you have, if you wanna lead your way in promoting diplomacy or water diplomacy in the Nile, you have to be careful about selecting what kind of poetry, because sometimes it's this kind of poetry you will not. It's history, yes, we agree on that, but there is no need sometimes to refer to it again, because it might give you a misleading message. This is my advice, but I will not comment about the artists or the singers that you have chosen. It's your right. I cannot deny you this, but be careful about the selection of the poetry or the songs, because it gives you it sends a message. Music, of course, sends a message to all of us. Thank you very much.
If I may say something? Yes. Yeah. We were quite afraid of what you just said, so we tried to be very judicious when choosing the songs. And so that's why we like, for the Ethiopian case, we knew the Ethiopian situation, so we could choose these representative songs, so to say. But for the Egyptian and Sudanese cases, we actually contacted Egyptian and Sudanese and asked them to give us these representative songs of their countries. Which songs most represent how people feel about the Nile in their countries? So it's not an answer to your question, to your comment. I completely take your comment, but I just want you also to know that we actually tried to be very careful and judicious in choosing the songs. We did not want to offend anybody. We actually want to bring everybody together with this music. So we actually went to our friends, Egyptian and Sudanese friends. We asked for the interpretation of the music, because obviously we don't know Arabic. And so we tried to be selective.
No, by the way, I did not feel offended at all. I just want to explain the kind of message that you are trying to send us. Some of which was news to me. It might make me to rethink about certain ideas that could lead me to a wrong direction. This is what I'm talking about. You want to, of course, and I'm sure of that you want to send a positive message. How music can play a role in easing, for instance, any differences. It's a good initiative that we are sharing the music from the Nile Basin, but we have to understand the context of this music in order to send a positive message that you could build on. This is my reason behind the comment. I'm not saying anything about any artist that you have chosen. As I said before, it's your right. You are the owner of the project. It's your right to go to any singer. I cannot deny you this right. But I'm talking about the message that you're trying to say. Thank you very much.
Just a quick intervention. You know, in Ethiopia, for example, the way we perceive the Nile is really transformed. And it is evolved tremendously. Initially, it was portrayed as a robber, a thief, and even in our church, it's a kind of wax and gold kind of saying things. We have that, and it's also a symbol of love, it's a symbol of greatness, and it's a symbol of, robbery, and it's also a symbol of development. The last music you choose for us, again, that's Masrish's music. If anyone wants to understand Ethiopia's position and Ethiopia's position on the Nile is in that music, in Gendat Masrish's music. And my comment is, when you choose, for instance, the poems, the lyrics, you should put, for instance, something on the cooperative side of the river that she said. She said, at one time, in Amharic says, በፍቅር ብንይዘው አባይ ሀገር ዋርካ ለዓለም ይበቃል እንኳን ለአፍሪካ, which means if we maintain the Nile with love, it is just like an oak that gives shade for us. It is enough, not only for Africa, but also to the world. That is the understand, that's the perspective. This is a kind of reactionary sometimes, reacting to some sort of discourse. Like, there were some songs from our brothers and sisters from other countries like the Nile is mine and mine. And yes, you're right, sometimes it creates a kind of message that may trouble us, but as history we should tell it, but to view the future we should also be careful.
Yes, but we don't have in the music or any songs saying that the Nile is Egyptian.
Okay.
We don't have it.
Thank you. There's one final question.
Thanks for the music and bringing the academia to this kind of thing. But I have two issues. One
Yes.
is music is informed by the social, cultural, and political environment, which the composer can now come up with a message. But what I missed is to see the choice of songs informed by the years. Putting in context the history Professor gave us, when was this music composed and comes out to the public? Because I believe if somebody did music now, the message would be different because of the timing, because of the social, political moment issues around the Nile. So for us to appreciate that kind of thing, the music, I think it would be very important to have the timeliness, the year of composition, so that you know at this point of time, this kind of music was speaking this kind of message. And for me, I would interpret the social, political, cultural, and government issues. Now, when we come to currently, which kind of music, for example, musicians be singing about the Nile? Is it a music which is talking about the love of the Nile, or be music about selfishness of the Nile use and those kind of things? So for me, that one I missed. That kind of year or time periodical music composition and the message.
Okay. I'll just start with a small disclaimer so that whatever answer I give you will be okay, basically. We are neither music nor experts. Maybe we will be at some point, but not yet. It's a valid point that you raised, but while doing this small project, let's say, we had basically one plan, which is basically how can especially Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia come together. And we said, okay, music can be the key because we came across that project and it's a fantastic project basically. And the message, however slightly differently it might be interpreted, was basically how Nile is perceived in music and how it changed basically through collaborative work. And while trying to actually look into that, we realized we started finding more how actually it changed. Okay, for Ethiopia, we knew after the GERD that the narrative changed, but we actually didn't know about the case of the Nubians, the Aswan Dam and the Meroe Dam in Egypt and in Sudan, the effect of that. So basically, we didn't specifically tell you, but the music, for instance, the one with the Aswan Dam, we did it. It was right after the Aswan Dam was basically built. And for Ethiopia, we didn't exactly again have the years, but it was before the GERD and after the GERD. Maybe if we actually need the presentation, it would have been easy. But we understand that there's a lot to do, but we're hoping maybe this could be just a start. Yes. Yeah. And it's not only basically music diplomacy, but taking into consideration historical unconventional diplomacies like the cricket diplomacy, the ping pong diplomacy. It doesn't necessarily have to be high level and state related. There should be other ways to bring people together. That's the message we're trying to portray basically.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Personally, when I interviewed Nina Diegues, who is the Egyptian ethnomusicologist who initiated the Nile project, this musical project you just presented, what I've learned is that different Nile Basin countries have also different musical scales, different tones. In the Egyptian music you find tones that are not present in the Egyptian or in the Ethiopian and so, or in the Sudanese. So, and what they learn by pulling musicians together and how to, the way they're working together is to acknowledge differences. It's not just syncretism, eh? You don't put all together, but you start by acknowledging and learning about differences and then you create connections where you can, through music, tones, scales, instruments. So I think this recipe, acknowledging differences and creating connections, is something that we can definitely apply not only to music but also to research between different disciplines, and hopefully also in water diplomacy between different countries at political level. So thank you very much for your presentation. We are a little bit behind schedule, 15 minutes. So let's take the final presentation, which I think also will introduce very well the high-level dialogue that will follow. We already say who speaks for the river, so I'm very glad to invite Lama El-Ato from on the floor. Lama is also an environmental engineer who is currently doing a PhD at Erasmus University in Rotterdam on climate change as a catalyst for cooperation in the Nile Basin. Lama has also been, still works as a consultant for NGOs and international organizations specifically on climate change in the Nile Basin. So thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Emmanuel. As Emmanuel mentioned, I've been working on the Nile for a number of years now, not just academically from my PhD, but also in relation to civil society, actually. I co-founded an NGO back in 2011, right after the revolution, called the Water Institute of the Nile, with a bunch of Egyptian colleagues, looking at how we can do people-to-people diplomacy in terms of different entities across the Nile Basin countries. And as we also mentioned, I'm a PhD candidate, and I also am an environmental and climate change specialist to several organizations. So I'm trying to look throughout this research is how climate change actually can be a tool for opportunity for cooperation on the Blue Nile River Basin. And here I'm talking specifically about Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia within that context. Often, as you've already heard in many of the presentations, both by Terry and by many others, is that water can often be a pawn for conflict, and the words water wars have often been thrown around very often and so forth. But what I'm trying to actually show here is that moving away from the water war rhetoric, how can we actually begin to find ways and tools whereby from every opportunity, from every crisis, there can stem an opportunity, and hence climate change. There have been several instances on a global level where climate change, for instance, has been actually pegged towards conflict. The Syrian one is a very obvious one that has often been pegged to it, but academically has been actually refuted. But in many instances, for instance, the Darfur case example has also been an example whereby water and climate variabilities have been associated to the conflict in the Darfur situation. Again, academically and scientifically has not been completely proven, so we need to be very careful in what we actually peg to climate change and what isn't. The synopsis of what I would actually like to show within this research is that climate change, as conflictive and as controversial as it may actually be, is actually potentially a window of opportunity for cooperation on the Blue Nile River Basin as opposed to conflict, and actually can move the way forward for potential opportunities. And the way I plan to show that is looking at what we often call the WEF nexus, the water, energy, food nexus, and how that can begin to play in. And what I often do, what I've done in my research, is actually highly criticize the WEF nexus in the traditional term that it has been utilized, because the WEF nexus, which I'll go into a little more detail later, often again describes how we can use this river body from a water, energy, food nexus standpoint, strictly from the economic and utilitarian uses, which I discussed earlier, but doesn't look at how climate change or environmental variability stands for actually the environmental integrity for the river basin and for the water as it stands. So that's also something I critique very heavily, and how we can bring in that environmental dimension into the WEF nexus to play in as something to push the river basin forward, and as well bringing it as an opportunity for cooperation when we discuss climate change. So very brief, I'm sure you've had quite a bit of examples on the Nile Basin so far, so I'll be very brief. This is the longest river in the world, the Nile Basin, 11 countries. I'm focusing on the Blue Nile River Basin, which is this watershed here, which stems in the Ethiopian highlands, and then through Sudan and Egypt. So the geographical scope of my research strictly is focused on those 3 countries. Basically, when we talk about climate change, many of the impacts that we discuss in terms of climate stresses is how Africa is going to be the most impacted. And when we talk about the most vulnerable countries and the most vulnerable states to be in fact impacted by climate change, we need to put into very careful assessment is what we talk about is the vulnerability assessment, or the readiness factor. So states, for instance, like the United States, have been hit by many climate-induced storms, for instance, like Hurricane Katrina or otherwise, which may potentially be also attributed to climate variability and changes. But their readiness factor in terms of their infrastructure in dealing with these kinds of storms and extreme events has been much more receptive to bounce back than other poorer countries and most vulnerable countries. So we take the example of Africa, which, because of the poverty and because of the lesser infrastructure that it has, obviously is more impacted by any of these extreme events that we begin to discuss. So about 25% of Africa's population currently experience high water stress. And again, when we talk about water stress here, we talk about 2 types of water scarcity. We talk about physical water scarcity and economic water scarcity. And when we talk about the Blue Nile countries, specifically Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan, those are categorized quite specifically differently. So physical water scarcity is defined, and this is by the Water Index, is how physical amount of water that is physically available within the boundaries of your state in terms of water availability, and whether or not you're actually below the water poverty line. So in that context, both Egypt and Sudan are considered physically water scarce nations. Economic water scarcity, which is where Ethiopia actually fits into this description, is what we describe as economically water scarce, is that they may necessarily have the overall water availability in terms of volume within the parameters of the boundaries of their country, but the access to the water is not available due to the variability in the different regions that it is available in. So because of this economic water scarcity, again poses the problem of, well, how do we access the water? How do we get to it? And hence the problem of where does this water stress lie? And these are very important to understand when we talk about cooperation on climate change, is to understand the different dimensions of what water stress necessarily means in each of the countries. So added on to that, we also have an increase in population, which means development, it means more demand, it means more industries, more agriculture, more people need to eat. Let's make it very simple. As we have heard over the course of the day, the tensions over the history across the Blue Nile, where we have some of our politicians and presidents have been claiming for different water resources over the years. So there is that already history of tensions around the Nile, which adds that factor or facet to the tensions on the Nile. So to break it down, when we talk about the 3 countries in terms of where do they necessarily stand in terms of specific stresses, Egypt, being in a very dry climate with very high dependency on the River Nile, is a very highly water-stressed nation. And in terms of water scarcity, is very severely under the water poverty line, and is in fact moving towards extreme water scarcity in terms of its definitions. Ethiopia is slightly different. In terms of what we talk about, it has a very extreme energy deficit. So with only 30% that are access to the grid, where the rest of the country has no access to the grid whatsoever, their notion of looking at the Nile is a very different notion in terms of development, so that how that they can actually begin to develop the Nile for energy access for production. So their viewpoint is also, and their lens is a little bit different. Sudan is also a very different lens as well, as Sudan is also in a hot, arid climate with water scarcity, but their objective for it is slightly different, whereas they've often been pegged as the food basket, not just for East Africa, but also for most of the Middle East and for the Arab countries and GCC. In that respect, Sudan is very focused on food production. So water in the Nile for them is very focused on, well, how can we feed all these people? So when we talk about priorities in terms of development and priorities for each of these countries in terms of stresses, we talk about water stress, we talk about energy stress, we talk about food stress. And if we can begin to understand that mentality in terms of the priorities for the countries, well, how does that translate into what we then refer to as the water, energy, food nexus? And this is where we can begin to understand where benefit sharing can come into play. Okay. So I'll be brief. And so again, in light of the diverse water stresses such as climate change and transboundary water conflicts and increasing demand, how can opportunity for cooperation happen across the Blue Nile? So the water energy food nexus is very simple. Water energy, when we talk about the water energy nexus, often deals with what we call as hydroelectric dams and otherwise. Energy food is very obvious. Energy food is often when we discuss the production line of food and how that fits in for energy that is used for food, such as the life cycle assessment in terms of energy production and otherwise. Water food is the obvious one, irrigation and otherwise, which plays into agricultural schemes. And with our stresses, we have obviously development, population, climate change, and the environmental degradation and pollution of this water body that, again, is very much often negated. So when we talk about water overall availability, we always talk about quantity, but we very, very rarely talk about quality. And the problem with this aspect is that if we negate the aspect of water quality and we begin to continuously pollute this river body, you're actually decreasing the overall quantity that you still have to be able to use. So it needs to come into play with it. When we talk about environmental degradation, we talk about the overall environmental integrity of the basin, we need to not discuss strictly the quantity, but also the quality of the water and how that comes into play. This gives a very brief sort of distribution in terms of the three countries and where they stand in terms of water availability and in terms of consumption. So we look at access to electricity in terms of the population. We look at Egypt with a very strong access to electricity, Ethiopia, which is quite low, and Sudan also quite low. Access to water in some of these countries also, again, just varies quite a bit. The freshwater withdrawals in terms of BCMs per year, as you can see, are quite high. And this is from the Nile. And the freshwater per capita, in terms of what is available, 21, and overall, so there's very large volume of water in some of these countries. And then the renewable freshwater resources, as you can see. So basically, looking at this, what do we see? We see that there, from the distribution in terms of water availability, there are some countries that may have very, very high water availability, but in terms of access to electricity and access to water, not necessarily the case, which is again coming to play what we discussed as the economic water scarcity. And that's where this comes into play. Is understanding these facts plays into what we mean by economic water scarcity versus physical water scarcity. So when we talk about water energy nexus, the obvious culprit is looking at hydroelectric dams. These are many of the dams within the three countries, and some of this was already discussed in Tamer's presentation. I'd like to argue and state that in often what is now this new rhetoric that is being developed when we discuss infrastructure projects such as dams, is that dams in many movements across the globe and in international NGOs are actually no longer being labeled as a clean energy source for the various reasons that the reservoirs are so large and so huge that the methane emissions, the CH4 emissions that come out of these reservoirs are now actually not creating the net effect of CO2 and a CO2 net deficit, whereas actually it's not only a net gain, but potentially even further. So, and not just international NGOs, but even the World Bank as it stands is no longer labeling infrastructure dams as clean energy source. It is a renewable energy source because the freshwater, the river is a freshwater renewable source, but it is no longer being labeled as a clean energy source. So this being said, this is when we talk again about sustainability of dams and how we want to think about the development of our future, we need to be very careful that actually maybe this is not the cleanest way for us to move forward at all. Obviously, the GERD is being discussed quite often. This is one of the many contentious and controversial aspects that's being discussed around water energy nexus. This is around the water-food nexus. Around water-food, one of the main interesting developments that is beginning to happen across the Nile Basin countries is what we call large land acquisitions. Many of these large land acquisitions that are happening in many of the Nile Basin countries are not only happening by domestic players, but also by international foreign players acquiring land within the Nile Basin in order to grow their crops and then export it to foreign countries. Many countries such as the GCC, Gulf countries, China, and otherwise have purchased, if you will, or leased out land in many of these countries in order to acquire this land. So the debate, when we talk about the political rhetoric of what it means for land acquisitions in terms of water energy nexus, is who are the additional players now at the negotiation table when we discuss water availability for agriculture and food on the basin. It's no longer the three players of maybe who are the usual. Maybe it's a lot more. Maybe there are other players in the process now that need to also be consulted and considered. Maybe not. But these are all aspects that need to come into play when we talk about water, land in the basin and where it's being utilized. So just to put things in perspective, this is Ethiopia, this is Egypt, and then this is Sudan and South Sudan. And these are the intended contracts that have been acquired for land acquisition. These are the actual contracts, these are pending, and these are the failed and abandoned. So just to put things into perspective of which countries across the basin have actually leased out many of their lands for agricultural usage to be exported to other countries. So again, one of the major players we need to discuss is what then are the opportunities for the water, energy, food nexus, and how do we consider all of these parameters when we discuss what it means for the environmental sustainability of the basin. So within the Blue Nile River Basin, countries that are water poor and water rich, as well as energy poor and energy rich. And what does that mean in terms of benefit sharing, in terms of the countries, and where does it stand for discussions on how we can all benefit together? On infrastructure projects, again, it's very important to note that there are arguments that some of these infrastructure projects no longer actually have a climate change adaptation agenda, as they are no longer labeled as I mentioned previously, clean energy sources. The most important part, however, is that the cooperation between these countries is key, and that the stakeholder engagement, as Abid very eloquently already labeled, this is how do we begin to bring in all of the stakeholders, whether it be the CSO organizations, the academics, the intellectuals, all at the negotiation table, so that we can understand what all these dimensions actually mean and where do they come into play. And in terms of the climate change cooperation, so many of the factors that come into play to encourage cooperation, of course, we talk about lack of water availability, lack of food, migration of farmers from crops from climate change. So what does that mean in terms of moving forward and moving around? Heat waves, again, because of the causing of deaths, the need for energy to survive, and of course the higher economic costs that come associated with many of these cases. And basically, to end my presentation, there's a quote that I really enjoy actually from the UN Human Development Report from back in 2006, but I still use it because I love it so much. Basically states that there is more than enough water in the world for domestic purposes, for agriculture, and for industry. Scarcity, however, is manufactured through political processes and institutions that disadvantage the poor. That's something I truly believe when it comes to the basin. Thank you for your time.